The morning sun in Ouagadougou was already beating down on the asphalt with a relentless fervor, raising a fine dust that hung in the air like a golden veil over the hustle and bustle of the central market, a vibrant labyrinth of colors, smells and sounds. Amid the hubbub of vendors hawking their wares and buyers haggling with contagious energy, a discreet figure moved with calculated slowness, absorbing the atmosphere with silent intensity. It was President IBRAHIM TRAORE, stripped of his formal attire, devoid of the glitter of the insignia of power, dressed in a simple faded cotton shirt and work trousers, his head covered by a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his features, making him just another face in the anonymous crowd. Beside him walked Salif, his oldest and most loyal advisor, a gray-haired man with a piercing gaze who was equally modestly dressed, the two of them looking like old friends on a morning stroll, observing the pulse of ordinary life. The president had felt a growing need to reconnect with the reality of his people, to hear the voices unfiltered in the palace corridors, to feel the pulse of the nation directly at its source. His aides painted a picture of contentment and progress, but a nagging in his heart told him that the truth was more complex, more nuanced, and he needed to see it, to feel it, without the barriers of his position. Not far away, sitting on a small, overturned wooden crate in the scant shade of a patched awning, was Amina, a girl of about 10 whose large, expressive eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of many lifetimes. Orphaned at a young age, she earned her living polishing shoes, her small, nimble hands transforming dusty leather into gleaming mirrors. Her hearing was extraordinarily acute, a gift honed by life on the streets, allowing her to pick up the subtlest whispers, the most revealing intonations, transforming the chaotic noise of the market into a symphony of information precious to her daily survival and to the little stories she told herself. That morning, as she carefully polished a pair of weather-beaten leather boots belonging to an elderly merchant, Amina noticed out of the corner of her eye the presence of two men whose simple attire could not disguise an unusual stiffness, a posture that clashed with the informality of the market. Their faces were closed, their gazes swept the room with calculated intensity, and the words they exchanged in low, almost hissing voices seemed to carry the weight of dangerous secrets, fragments that reached the girl's attentive ears like the harbinger of an invisible storm, a tone of urgency that made her hold her breath. They spoke of a dusk rendezvous, of bought loyalties, and of a foolproof plan for necessary change, with a passing mention of the guide, a reference that sent a shiver down Amina's spine. Although the words were coded, the intonation was unmistakable. It was something serious, something that threatened the established order, something that smelled of imminent danger. The girl, accustomed to deciphering the subtext of other people's conversations to protect herself, felt a wave of apprehension, a powerful intuition that those words were not just empty bravado, but the outline of a sinister plot. President Traore, absorbed in his own observations, stopped near a colorful fruit stand, feigning interest in ripe mangoes, while his ears strained to pick up the general mood, the day-to-day concerns. He heard complaints about prices, cautious hopes about new agricultural policies, and the eternal debate about the country's uncertain future. These were genuine voices, unvarnished by formality or fear, and each word was a small brick in the reconstruction of his perception of reality, a reality that seemed far more challenging than the optimistic reports suggested. It was then that he saw Amina. The girl was intent on her work, but there was a tension in her small shoulders, a glint of concern in her eyes that did not go unnoticed by the president's trained eye, accustomed to reading the nuances of human behavior. He approached slowly, Salif following at a discreet distance, and stopped before her, offering his own dusty boots for a polish. "Good morning, little worker," he said, his voice soft and friendly, trying to break the ice of formality. Amina looked up, surprised by the direct approach, but soon regained her professional composure. "Good morning, sir," she replied, her voice clear but low. As she began working on the president's boots, she felt an urgency to share what she had heard, but fear paralyzed her. Who would believe her, a simple shoeshine girl? What if I was wrong? The consequences could be dire. However, the look in the man's eyes, although unfamiliar, conveyed a certain kindness, a genuine attention that encouraged her. She began hesitantly. Sir, forgive my intrusion, but I have heard troubling things today, men talking of dark plans, of a secret meeting tonight to change things. The words came out in a stutter, but they carried a sincerity that made President Traore and Salif exchange a quick, meaningful glance. The president crouched down slightly, to be at eye level with the girl, his face now serious but still kind. What sort of things, my child? And who were these men? Amina described the men, their clothes, the way they spoke in code, repeating the exact phrases her prodigious auditory memory had captured. The meeting at dusk, loyalties bought, the guide must be removed for the necessary change. The last phrase, spoken with the somber intonation she had heard, made the president's blood run cold. The guide. It was a veiled term, but one sometimes used by his detractors to refer to him. This girl, with her innocence and her extraordinary hearing, might have just stumbled upon something terrifyingly real, something that his own intelligence services had not yet detected. President Traore felt a chill run down his spine, an icy chill that contrasted with the stifling morning heat in the market. The girl's words, spoken with disarming sincerity and a precision that left no room for doubt, echoed in his mind like a silent but deafening alarm. The guide must be removed. That phrase, so full of veiled threat, could not be a mere coincidence. It could not be the fruit of a child's imagination. There was a terrible truth behind that innocent accusation, a truth that he had come to seek in the streets and that had found him in the most unexpected and disturbing way possible, through the attentive ears of a child. Salif, his advisor, who had approached discreetly when he realized the gravity of the conversation, was pale-faced, his experienced eyes reflecting the same apprehension that had gripped the president. He knew the intricacies of Ouagadougou politics, the undercurrents of discontent and hidden ambitions that simmered beneath the surface of apparent calm. A rumor, a fragmentary piece of information like this, born in the heart of the market, could be the loose thread that would unravel a much larger conspiracy, a web of treachery woven in the shadows by enemies he knew existed but whose audacity he had perhaps underestimated. The president maintained his composure, thanking Amina with a kindness that belied the whirlwind of thoughts that plagued him. He placed a note of considerable value in the girl's small wooden box, far more than the polish on his boots was worth, a gesture of silent gratitude for information that could be worth his own life and the stability of his nation. "You were very brave to tell me this, Amina," he said, his voice firm but with a tone of genuine concern. "And very wise to see the danger. I promise we will take your words seriously." As he walked away from the girl, merging back into the crowd, but now with a completely different purpose, the president and Salif exchanged urgent words in low voices. The visit to the market, planned to be an immersion in popular reality, had turned into a race against time to uncover a potentially lethal threat. They needed to act quickly, but also with extreme caution, as they did not know the extent of the conspiracy, nor who among their own circles might be involved, who would be friends and who would be the wolf in sheep's clothing. "We need to confirm this, Ibrahim," Salif whispered, his eyes surreptitiously scanning their surroundings for any sign that they were being watched. "But if it's true, and my instincts tell me there's something very rotten here, we don't have much time. Meeting at dusk sounds like a deadline, an ultimatum. And if they intend to remove the guide, their target is clear and unmistakable, you." The bluntness of Salif's words was necessary, a reminder of the urgency of the situation. The president nodded, his face a mask of concentration. "Activate our most trusted network, Salif. I want eyes and ears everywhere, especially around figures who have already shown, shall we say, an overenthusiasm for leadership changes. But do so with the utmost discretion. We cannot alert them that we know, or they may accelerate their plans or simply disappear into the shadows, making themselves even more dangerous and difficult to find." The need for secrecy was absolute, a fine line between prevention and hastening disaster. They returned to the presidential palace by a back road, avoiding the main thoroughfares, their thoughts consumed by the shocking revelation. The president felt a mixture of gratitude for little Amina's courage and a deep bitterness at the betrayal that was unfolding. He had dedicated himself to reforming the country, to fighting corruption, to giving voice to the forgotten, but he knew that such efforts inevitably created powerful enemies, those whose privileges were threatened, those who preferred the status quo of exploitation and injustice. At the palace, President Traore called an emergency meeting with his chief of security, Commander Omar, a man of proven loyalty and nerves of steel, known for his ruthless efficiency and his ability to operate in the shadows. The president recounted what he had heard from Amina, emphasizing the seriousness with which they should treat this information, even if it came from such an unlikely source. Commander Omar listened attentively, his face impassive, but his eyes shone with an intensity that betrayed the seriousness with which he took the alert, without questioning its origin, but focusing on the threat. "We will investigate every word, Mr. President," Commander Omar said, his voice low and resolute. "If there is a mole, if there is a plan, we will find it. We will begin by monitoring the communications of individuals who fit the profile described, and we will increase surveillance in places that could be used for secret meetings. The description of the men that Miss Amina provided, though vague, can be a starting point. Every detail, no matter how small, will be scrutinized with the utmost rigor." As Commander Omar and his team discreetly began their investigations, President Traore felt a huge weight on his shoulders. Trust, a fundamental pillar of any leadership, seemed to be fading, replaced by the shadow of suspicion. Who among his ministers, his generals, his advisors, could be involved in this treacherous plot? Uncertainty was a slow poison, corroding tranquility and requiring constant vigilance, a state of alert that consumed his energy. He thought of Amina again, of those wide, serious eyes that had seen and heard so much. A street urchin, a shoeshine girl, had become the first line of defense for his presidency, a poignant reminder that courage and insight could emerge from the most unexpected places. He made a mental note to ensure the girl's safety, lest her bravery put her in danger. In that moment, she was more than an informant. She was a symbol of the innocence he fought to protect, the embodiment of the people he had sworn to serve and defend against all threats. The hours that followed the market revelation dragged on with agonizing slowness for President Traore, each minute charged with a palpable tension that permeated the normally serene corridors of the presidential palace. While Commander Omar and his intelligence team worked feverishly behind the scenes, cross-referencing information, analyzing surveillance data, and following the few leads they had, the president tried to maintain a facade of normality, going about his routine business, attending scheduled meetings, but his mind was on constant alert, every word, every glance exchanged subtly scrutinized for any sign of betrayal. Salif stood by her side like a silent shadow, his watchful eyes recording every detail, offering discreet but vital support. They both knew that time was of the essence. If Amina's information was correct, and with each passing moment that conviction grew stronger, the conspirators had a plan to act that very night. The window of opportunity to unravel the plot and neutralize the threat was closing fast, like a noose tightening around the nation's neck, threatening to suffocate its hopes for a more just and stable future. Little Amina, unaware of the turmoil her words had unleashed, continued her work in the market, but something had changed. The concern that had once been etched on her face had given way to a strange mix of fear and a dawning hope. The man who had polished her boots, with his kind gaze and his words of gratitude, seemed different from the other customers. There was a quiet authority about him, a gravity that made her feel, for the first time in a long time, that maybe someone really did care, that maybe her voice, however small, could mean something. Late in the afternoon, as the sun began its lazy descent toward the horizon, painting the Ouagadougou sky with shades of orange and purple, Commander Omar requested an urgent meeting with the president. His normally impassive face wore a grim expression that did not bode well. "Mr. President," he began, his voice low and controlled, "I believe we have confirmed the essence of the threat. Our sources indicate unusual movement between certain disaffected elements in the armed forces and some political figures known for their covert opposition to your government." He went on to detail the intercepts of coded communications that spoke of a decisive meeting and the need to restore true order, phrases that echoed Amina's own words dangerously. Furthermore, surveillance had detected secret meetings between some of these individuals in discreet locations on the outskirts of the city, meetings that had escalated in the last few hours. While they did not yet have the names of all those involved, or the exact location of the dusk meeting, the overall picture was alarming and undeniably real. "They are more organized than we realized, sir," Commander Omar continued. "And they appear to have support at levels we are still trying to determine. The reference to guidance is undoubtedly directed at you. The plan, it seems, is to create an incident during a supposed emergency meeting that they themselves intend to stage, using it as a pretext for a seizure of power." The coldness with which the commander described the plot only underlined its dangerousness, its calculated and treacherous nature. President Traore listened in silence, his face hardening with each word. The betrayal, previously a suspicion, now materialized with clear and frightening contours. Men who had sworn loyalty, who shared the country's table and decisions, were now conspiring to stab him in the back, to plunge the nation into an abyss of uncertainty and violence. A wave of indignation ran through his body, but he contained it, knowing that anger was a bad advisor at times like these. I needed clarity, strategy, a firm and decisive response. "Who are they, Commander?" the President asked, his voice sounding more tired than he would have liked. "We need names, we need faces. We need to know the extent of the cancer that has spread through our ranks." He knew the answer might be painful, that it might involve people close to him, but the truth, however bitter, was essential to combating the threat effectively and surgically, without causing more damage than necessary. "We are working on it, sir. A few names have already emerged, figures who have always been on the fringes of power but have influential connections. What concerns us is the possibility of infiltrators in their inner circle, someone with privileged access who could facilitate their action at a crucial moment," Omar explained, revealing the depth of his concern. The idea of a traitor among his closest associates was the most disturbing of all, a poison that undermined the very foundation of trust. As night fell over the city, bringing with it a darkness that seemed to mirror the deepening conspiracy, the presidential palace was discreetly transformed into a fortress. Security was increased, but subtly so as not to alert the conspirators. President Traore knew he needed to appear vulnerable, to continue his apparent routine, so that the traitors would feel confident in carrying out their nefarious plan, thus falling into the trap that was being carefully prepared for them. In his heart, the president could not help but think of Amina. That little girl, with her instinctive courage, had been the spark that had lit the darkness. He had instructed Salif to ensure that she was discreetly located and taken to a safe place, away from the danger that his information had inadvertently exposed her to. Protecting this little, anonymous heroine became a silent priority, a symbol of the fight he was waging not just for his mandate, but for the soul of his nation, for the hope that innocence and truth could indeed prevail over treachery and darkness. Night descended on Ouagadougou like a heavy cloak, laden with an almost palpable tension, a foreboding stillness that preceded the impending storm. In the presidential palace, the lights were shining as usual, but behind the facade of normality, a complex and risky operation was in full swing. President Traore, following Commander Omar's advice, prepared for the trap, knowing that any mistake, any sign that the conspiracy had been discovered, could have catastrophic consequences, precipitating an open and bloody confrontation that he desperately wanted to avoid at all costs. The conspirators' plan, as intelligence had begun to unravel, involved fabricating a national security crisis by calling an emergency meeting of the High Council in the middle of the night. It was at this point, with the president supposedly isolated and vulnerable among his advisors, some of whom were traitors themselves, that they intended to act, neutralizing his personal guard and forcing his resignation or, at worst, physically eliminating him. The audacity of the plan was shocking, revealing the desperation and determination of his enemies. Meanwhile, Salif, with his characteristic discretion, managed to locate Amina. The girl, still in the market that was beginning to empty as night fell, was approached by a plainclothes agent, a woman with kind features who, with carefully chosen words, explained that her safety was important and that he needed to accompany her to a protected place, just as a precaution. Amina, though startled by the sudden attention, remembered the kindness in the eyes of the man whose boots she had polished, and with instinctive trust, agreed to follow the agent, unaware of the true extent of the danger from which she was being protected. Back at the palace, President Traore was reviewing the final details of the counter-operation with Commander Omar. Elite troops, loyal to the last man, had been positioned discreetly at strategic points, ready to act at the first signal. Additional surveillance systems had been activated, and a small team of communications experts monitored all frequencies, searching for any clues that might reveal the identity of the conspiracy's leaders or their next steps. The atmosphere in the crisis room was charged with a restrained electricity, the calm of seasoned men in the face of imminent danger. Just before midnight, the president's phone rang. It was a call from one of his ministers, his voice choked with feigned urgency, reporting an alleged attack on a military outpost on the border and the need for an immediate meeting of the Security Council. It was the signal. The conspirators had taken the bait. President Traore, keeping his voice calm and controlled, agreed to the meeting, scheduling it for an hour in the main conference room, exactly as they had expected, following the script that had been presented to him. As he hung up the phone, the president exchanged a meaningful look with Commander Omar. "They are coming, Omar," he said, a mixture of grim relief and apprehension in his voice. "May God protect us and give us the wisdom to act correctly. We cannot fail. The future of Burkina Faso depends on what we do in the next few hours. It is not just my life that is at stake, but the hopes of millions of people who yearn for peace and justice." As ministers and advisors began to arrive at the palace, some with genuinely worried expressions, others with a calculated calm that barely concealed the betrayal in their hearts, Commander Omar's team worked to identify the main plotters of the coup. The descriptions provided by Amina, cross-referenced with surveillance data, helped narrow the circle of suspects. There were, as feared, prominent figures among them, men who had enjoyed the president's trust, making the betrayal all the more bitter and painful. President Traore entered the meeting room, his face a mask of seriousness, but showing no prior knowledge of the plot. He greeted each person present, his eyes searching theirs, searching for any hesitation, any sign of guilt. Some looked away quickly, others held his with cold audacity. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, the air thick with unspoken secrets and deadly intentions, a veritable pack of wolves gathered together. The meeting began, following the charade of the alleged border attack. The president allowed the conspirators to air their arguments, their manufactured concerns, watching closely to see who led the discussion, who supported the most radical proposals, who seemed too eager for drastic measures to be taken. It was a dangerous game of patience and observation, where one false move could mean the end. He needed to let them air their true intentions before he made the final move. Far away, in a safe and comfortable room within a discreet government facility, Amina slept soundly, oblivious to the unfolding drama and the crucial role she had played. Her act of courage, born of simple childlike honesty, had set in motion a chain of events that could save a nation. Her reward, for now, was the peaceful slumber of the righteous, sheltered from the storm she had helped to foresee, a small beacon of innocence amidst the darkness of betrayal. Inside the palace conference room, the atmosphere was as thick as the haze before a sandstorm, every word uttered carrying a heavy subtext, every glance exchanged a potential sentence. President Traore led the meeting with an outward calm that belied the storm raging in his chest, allowing the conspirators to inadvertently reveal their claws and the depth of their treachery. He kept a close eye on the Minister of Defense, General Bako, a burly man with a booming voice and barely concealed ambitions, who seemed to be the most vehement in his call for firm and immediate intervention, a euphemism for the power grab they were planning. Beside Bako, the Chief of Internal Intelligence, Colonel Diallo, a name ironically similar to that of the loyal sergeant from the previous story, but this one a man of dubious loyalty and shady connections, supported each suggestion with suspicious enthusiasm, his small, shrewd eyes shining with barely contained anticipation. They were the main articulators, the visible faces of the conspiracy in that room, but President Traore knew, through information from Commander Omar, that the network of traitors was more extensive, with tentacles that extended to different levels of the government and the armed forces, a hydra that needed to be decapitated in its entirety. As the fabricated debate about the border crisis raged, Commander Omar, from an adjacent control room, was sending discreet updates to the president through a small, nearly invisible electronic device in his ear. His teams had managed to pinpoint the key locations where the coup troops were massed, ready to march on the palace at the signal of their leaders. They were also monitoring communications between the plotters in the room and their subordinates outside, waiting for the precise moment when the order for the final assault would be given. President Traore, following the plan, began to show a calculated reluctance to accept the drastic measures proposed by General Bako. He questioned the need to deploy additional troops to the capital, arguing that this could cause panic among the population. This hesitation was the trigger the conspirators had been waiting for, the confirmation that the president would be an obstacle to their vision of order. General Bako exchanged a meaningful glance with Colonel Diallo, a glint of impatience and resolve in his eyes. It was the moment that preceded the break. "Mr. President," General Bako said, his voice suddenly hard, the deferential tone gone. "With all due respect, your hesitation at this critical moment could cost the nation dearly. There are times when difficult decisions must be made, even if they are unpopular. The security of the state comes first." It was a statement of defiance, a veiled ultimatum. The silence that followed was heavy, everyone in the room holding their breath, sensing the shift in the power dynamics. It was then that President Traore decided it was time to act. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze slowly sweeping over every face in the room, lingering a little longer on Bako and Diallo. "General Bako, Colonel Diallo," he began, his voice now cold and sharp as steel. "I appreciate your concern for the security of the state. However, I have reason to believe that the true threat to our nation lies not within our borders, but within this very room, among those who have sworn to protect it." A shocked murmur ran through the room. The faces of the conspirators paled instantly, surprise and fear etched on their features. General Bako tried to stammer a protest, but the chairman cut him off with a firm gesture of his hand. "There is no need for further farce, General. We know of your plan. We know of the meeting at dusk. We know of your intention to remove the guide. The mention of the exact words Amina had heard was like a final blow, disarming any denial. At the same moment, the doors to the conference room opened and elite soldiers, armed and with resolute expressions, rushed in, surrounding the ministers and advisors. Commander Omar walked in close behind, his face impassive but with a gleam of restrained triumph in his eyes. "General Bako, Colonel Diallo, and their associates," Omar announced, his voice ringing with authority. "You are under arrest for high treason and conspiracy against the state." Confusion ensued. Some of the conspirators tried to resist, others simply surrendered, the shock of the discovery paralyzing them. General Bako, still in disbelief, looked at the president with a mixture of hatred and defeat. How did you know?" he managed to ask, his voice a thread. President Traore just stared at him, without answering directly, letting the mystery of his source of information hang in the air, a silent testament to the unexpected surveillance that had unmasked them. As the traitors were led away under guard, President Traore felt a wave of exhaustion, but also of profound relief. The immediate threat had been contained, the coup had been thwarted before it had even begun. But he knew that the battle was not over. It was now necessary to cleanse the ranks, restore confidence, and above all, ensure that those who had dared to betray the nation were brought to justice, setting an example so that such ignominy would never be repeated. And through it all, he did not forget the little shoe shiner from the market, the anonymous heroine whose attentive listening and quiet courage had been the key to that crucial victory. With the main conspirators arrested and the coup attempt neutralized at its epicenter, a tense calm began to settle over the presidential palace, replacing the adrenaline of confrontation. However, President Traore and Commander Omar knew that the operation was far from over. It was crucial to dismantle the entire network supporting the coup plotters, to identify every accomplice, every sympathizer who, even if not in the meeting room, played a role in the sinister plot aimed at plunging Burkina Faso into chaos and tyranny. The ramifications of that night still needed to be fully exposed and nipped in the bud. Intelligence teams, now with access to the prisoners' communications devices and seized documents, worked tirelessly to trace the traitor's connections. Arrest warrants were issued for other military officers and civilian figures scattered throughout the capital and other regions of the country suspected of direct or indirect involvement in the conspiracy. The objective was clear: a thorough and ruthless purge, to ensure that no seeds of treason remained to germinate again, ensuring the lasting stability of the nation. As the sweeping operation unfolded, President Traore made a point of personally overseeing Amina's well-being. He sent Salif, his most trusted advisor, to check on the girl and ensure that she was safe and comfortable in the discreet location where she had been sheltered. Salif found Amina awake, her wide eyes still a little frightened but also curious about all the commotion and secrecy surrounding her. He reassured her, explaining simply that she had helped prevent a major problem for many people and that the president was very grateful. News of the failed coup attempt began to filter out to the public, initially as whispered rumors, then gathering momentum as more arrests were made. There was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and, for many, profound relief. President Traore, despite his image as a strong, reforming leader, was not universally popular, and the existence of an opposition determined to oust him by force was a grim reminder of the fragility of the country's young democracy and the deep divisions that still needed to be overcome. The following morning, with the sun high in the sky, dispelling the last shadows of the tense night, President Traore addressed the nation in a speech broadcast on radio and television. His voice was firm but charged with restrained emotion. He confirmed the coup attempt, praised the loyalty of the security forces who had remained faithful to the Constitution, and promised that all those involved in the betrayal would be brought to justice, without exception. He spoke of the need for national unity and constant vigilance against those who seek to undermine democratic institutions. In his speech, however, the president did something unexpected. Without revealing names or details that could compromise security, he mentioned that the initial warning of the plot had come from a humble and unlikely source. A watchful eye and honest ear in the hearts of our people. An ordinary person who had demonstrated extraordinary courage. He used this reference to emphasize that every citizen had a role to play in defending the nation and that a country's true strength lay in the integrity and vigilance of its people, not just its armies. For Amina, who heard the speech on the small radio in the safe place where she was, those words, although anonymous, sounded like a direct recognition. A small smile appeared on her lips, and a warmth of pride and belonging warmed her young heart. She, a street girl, a shoeshine boy, had done something important, something that the president himself recognized. It was a new and powerful feeling, which began to erase the marks of invisibility and abandonment that had accompanied her for so long. In the days and weeks that followed, the dust from the coup attempt began to settle. Investigations continued, revealing the depth of the conspiracy, which involved not only personal ambitions but also external interests seeking to destabilize the country in order to exploit its resources. President Traore, strengthened by renewed popular support and the loyalty shown by much of his armed forces, seized the moment to accelerate important reforms aimed at strengthening institutions and addressing the root causes of the discontent that fueled such plots. He did not forget Amina. When the situation had completely returned to normal and the girl's safety could be guaranteed without reservation, the president arranged for her to be received at the palace. Not as an informant, but as an honored guest. He thanked her personally, in a private and emotional conversation, and with the support of his wife, offered the girl the opportunity to have an education, a safe home and a dignified future, far from the uncertainties and dangers of the streets. Amina, initially shy and awed by the grandeur of the palace, gradually began to open up, her natural intelligence and resilience shining through. She gratefully accepted the offer, seeing it not only as a reward but as a chance to build a different life, one where her voice and intelligence could continue to make a difference, perhaps in ways she had not yet imagined. The girl who had polished shoes in the Ouagadougou market, and whose listening ears had saved a nation, was about to begin a new and promising chapter in her extraordinary journey. This story reminds us that heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places and that the courage of one individual, no matter how humble his or her position, can have a profound impact on the fate of many. If you were moved by Amina's journey and the fight for justice in Burkina Faso, Please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one. Leave your like if this story touched your heart, and share in the comments what caught your attention the most. Your engagement is essential for us to continue bringing you content that inspires and motivates.